Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I would like to make special welcome to my parents who are here this evening. And very special welcome especially to my mom. Welcome to my mom who's deaf. And the reason that I invited her to come to this class is because of some of you know that Zoom just started putting captions at the bottom. So you'll see at the bottom, you can choose to press the captions, and then it's pretty good. The Hebrew always looks like, I saw last night that Bereshit in Hebrew was barbecue rub. So the Hebrew's not going to work well, but the English is good. So just so grateful to technology and to God for that service. And grateful to Zoom. So welcome to my mom. And if you know other deaf people who are interested in Torah, then just tell them that that they can come now. So I hope this works. But welcome. Let's begin with a blessing over Torah. And I'm sure that the blessing will not transcript well. We'll begin with a blessing, thanking God for this practice that we have of studying together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right. So we have been on this journey and looking through the poetry of the Bible. And we've come to see that actually covers quite a lot of the Bible. There's a lot there. We have a lot of ground to cover. There are a lot of books that are written in verse form. I've said many times, some people think that the entire Bible, Hebrew Bible, is written in verse, though those who have tried to prove that have usually failed. But it is a testament to the fact that much of the Bible appears to have a kind of rhythmic, poetic quality, though it's not always detectable, right? So sometimes we have to kind of suss it out. But it is obvious and detectable, and the first place my mind goes when I think biblical poetry, in the book of Psalms. Psalms, 150 Psalms, and they're like they're like the sonnets of, the sonnets are really like the Psalms, but they're like the sonnets of the canon, right? It's like a book of poetry. And so we've done Psalms before, and honestly, we could just have a class on Psalms. That would be a good class. That would be a good poetry class. We just one Psalm after another. But I think we have all wanted to explore some of the other riches of the tradition, Song of Songs, and we just got through this cycle of looking at all of the books of the Bible attributed to King Solomon, Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, lots of good stuff. And next week we'll begin, we did a three-part series on the book of Job. That was amazing. And I like this three-part series rhythm. So next week we will begin the three major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Also great books of poetry. So this is all by way of saying that I've started to feel like Psalms are going to be kind of like the glue that holds these various explorations together. Well, between sections, we'll just go back to the Psalms. Let's study another Psalm, because there are 150 of them, and we would do well to study them all. And we've seen a few of them, but the ones we've seen have generally been in the service of some occasion, in the midst of political turmoil in our own country. We looked at a psalm that dealt with that theme, and there are several. I think the last psalm we looked at was a psalm that is recited liturgically on the new month. So what psalm has been dedicated to the new month? And we could do some of that work as well. This, not just the psalm itself, but how has this psalm been used historically? So there's lots to do just in the book of Psalms. but I have been wanting to do what we're going to do tonight for a while. In fact, it seems in some ways like the most obvious thing to do, which is to look at the very first psalm. We should have started here, but instead we started with some of the poetry in the Torah, another good place to start. But this first psalm, the first of the 150 psalms, is a classic. You heard Uri Shachar singing it at the outset. It's a classic. And but more than just being one of the classics, it is the first. And if you've been studying with us so far, then you have seen that in biblical poetry, one of the devices we have seen in biblical poetry is that the first line of a poem, it often sets the theme for the poem. I mean, that's true in lots of poetry, but it becomes almost a rule in biblical poetry that we should really spend time with the first line, the first verse of a psalm, because it's going to give us a theme that the rest of the psalm is going to play with. So it is with that in mind that surely the first poem, the first psalm of the book of Psalms is going to set the theme for the whole book. And indeed, that is the case. The first psalm is a kind of a little masterpiece. It's a very compact 6-line summary of, well, we'll talk about it tonight, but I titled this class "The Whole Religion in One Psalm" because you might think of it that way. It's a kind of a summary of just the way to be in the world, right? Just a very quick summary, and you know, there's a way in which you could take these 6 lines and live by them. And you don't have to take my word for it. I want to share with you a similar sentiment from Rabbi David Kimchi, the Radak, who is one of our great biblical commentators. And look at what the Radak says. The Radak says that David includes in this psalm the Torah of the human being, Torat Ha'adam, the Torah of the human being, and what it is proper for him to do in this world. Okay, that's a big topic. What do we do in the world? With and we'll see this too, with good reward for the righteous and punishment for the wicked. Now, that already takes us into, well, what kind of religion is this exactly? And it isn't, it's let's say it's David's vision of Judaism, or it's the psalmist's vision of Judaism, and there are certain themes that recur, and one of them is the binary between the righteous and the wicked. We'll see that soon. And then he ends with this beautiful line, V'hu mizmor nichbad me'od, lefikach hachel sifro bo. And this is an exceedingly important psalm, and therefore he opens his book with it. So yeah, there's the vibe. Like this is really a big deal, this psalm. This is really the one to take a look at it. So so let's get a feel for the whole religion according to the psalmist, according to David, or the whole Torah of the human being. What is the human being up to in the world, or should the human being be up to in the world? Here's a source sheet for you in the chat, and we'll read it through. It's just 6 lines, and you know, I know one of the constant struggles, right, is like making sure to restrain as a teacher, it's restrain myself from putting too much material in, and sometimes I fail in that, and then we're racing to get through the material. I can't help it because it's such good material, but it is a challenge that I have to confront. And yet tonight we really have just 6 lines. So I'm sure we'll run out of time anyway. I've already used up 12 of our minutes, but I hope that with just 6 lines, we'll really have a chance to dig in to the language here. And it is not just important thematically as a psalm, but the poetry, which is really our subject, is so rich and so complex and so beautiful that I hope we have just that we were able to savor the experience. Okay, so let's read through the psalm, and then we'll go back to the top, and we'll take it just line by line. And here is the very first psalm. You heard it sung, Ashrei Ha'ish. Okay, so here is the psalm begins. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach ba'atzat rishayim, uvederech chataim lo amad, uvamoshav leitzim lo yashav. Happy is the man who has not walked in the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the path of sinners, nor sat at a gathering of mockers. Ki im b'torat Adonai cheftzo, uvartorato yehege yomam v'layla. Rather, the Torah of the Eternal is his desire, and he meditates on God's teaching day and night. V'haya ka'etz shatul al palgei mayim, asher piryo yiten bi'ito, va'alehu lo yibol, v'chol asher yaseh yatzliach. He is like a tree planted beside streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, whose leaf never fades, whatever it produces thrives. Lo chen harashayim, ki im kamotz asher tidpenu ruach. Not so the wicked, rather they are like the chaff that wind blows away. Al ken lo yakimu rashayim b'mishpat, v'chataim ba'adat tzadikim. Therefore the wicked will not survive judgment, nor will sinners in the assembly of the righteous. Ki yodea Adonai derech tzadikim, v'derech rashayim toved. For the Eternal knows the path of the righteous, but the path of the wicked is forever lost. Okay, that's it. That's the first psalm. So, okay, let's go back to the top here, and we're just going to take it line by line and see if we can see the development. And there is a development over the course of these short 6 lines. So we're just looking now at this very first line. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach b'atzat rishayim uvederech chataim lo amad uv'moshav leitzim lo yashav. Happy is the man who has not walked in the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the path of sinners, nor sat in a gathering of mockers. There's a lot to analyze just here, but I'd like to just start with the first word. And I think it's worth really leaning into this and emphasizing this, because the first word in the book of Psalms is happy. Happy. And we don't think a lot about happiness in this religion. We're not known for our happiness, are we? The Hebrew Bible, famously happy, right? Not so. And yet that is the first word in the first line, in the first psalm. So I guess I want to start there, because I want to think more about happiness and how to be happy in the world. And that matters to me. And I don't even think to turn to my Judaism for that. Turn to my Judaism for holiness, turn to my Judaism for justice, but happiness? So let's start there. Happiness. Ashrei, the noun would be osher. Okay, so what kind of happiness is this? There are many different kinds of happiness, and there are many words for happiness in Judaism, and the most famous of them is probably simcha, not osher. So what is this happiness? This man, they picked a man, Ashrei ha'ish, this man. So this man who is happy, what is the quality of his happiness? And it's somewhat defined, right? Happy because he didn't do these things. So what is the nature of this happiness? And I see Liz is ready to jump in.
So I think for me, it's well-being, as opposed to simcha means joy for me. And I actually have been doing a lot with happiness, because I've been helping a happiness guru, a happiness expert. We've been trying to define what happiness is. And happiness really is very amorphous and does have many of those different components. And I think the 3 key ones are enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. It seem to be the 3 elements. And that satisfaction translates to well-being, which seems to be the element that's being leaned on here.
Okay, good. So Liz says well-being, and by that I understand her to mean a kind of, satisfaction, a kind of peace, tranquility, happiness that is a calm happiness, as opposed to, Liz said, as opposed to joy. Now, of course, the English can confuse us, and different people will use different English words to describe different states of being. But I think we understand that Liz means it's not like giddy happiness. It's like a calm, serene happiness. Yael, what do you think?
Yes, I agree. And I would say fulfillment. And so this Osher, to me, isn't dependent even on your health. I've seen people who are burdened with ill health and with difficulties and challenges in their lives, but they have Osher because they live a fulfilled life. They live life in harmony with a belief system, and it is not tanua. It's not dependent on it can't be influenced or taken away.
Okay, good. Okay, so Yael echoes some of what Liz was saying, happiness as a kind of a broader sense of fulfillment, and adds to that if you were attached to that deep sense of well-being, fulfillment, satisfaction, peace, then your circumstances would not matter. It wouldn't be the kind of happiness you had in response to something, but a kind of a deeper kind of happiness. Okay, I want, just because I want to keep doing this, but I want to tell you how I try and deal with these sorts of terms, these sorts of synonyms, these sorts of ambiguous Hebrew terms, and that is to look at their usage, their first usage. That's a technique I often use, and here we're in luck, because if we go back to the first use of Osher in the Torah, does anyone know what it is, by the way? There's a name it's associated with, is the big clue, right? And the name is Asher. So the first use here is, it's interesting. It's in chapter 30 of Genesis, and then the first use of Simcha is in chapter 31. So we have a nice little juxtaposition there, so we can see that the words are being used very differently. So let's just we've heard a couple of interpretations, and let's just enter in these reference points, okay? So here, Leah is the first person to use happiness, and I translated it here as joy, right? Which is actually, Liz didn't translate this as joy, but I meant to distinguish it from happiness. So you can see the terms can get a little bit imprecise, when working in English. But Vatomer Leah ba'oshri ki ishruni banot v'tikra et shmo Asher. Sorry, I didn't read that with the right pause. Vatomer Leah ba'oshri ki ishruni banot v'tikra et shmo Asher. Leah declared, "What joy! All the women will be joyous for me, or they will celebrate me, or they will be happy for me, and they will make me happy." So she named him Asher. Okay, so that's just interesting. It is the response to birth, which indeed is a joyous occasion, right? And then the use of happiness, simcha, first comes from the mouth of Lavan, a less favorable character in the Torah. And Lavan is saying to Jacob, "Why did you leave? Why did you leave in the middle of the night, flee in secrecy and mislead me and not tell me? I would have sent you off with festive music, besimcha uveshirim, with happiness and with song, with timbrel and with lyre." So the happiness of celebration, of a party. They're both celebrations there, but I just want to throw that out, that the first time Osher is used, it's in response to a birth. The first time Simcha is used, it's in response to a party, right? And some of the distinctions that we've already heard could be used to think through those two kinds of happiness. But let's try and collect a couple of more responses. And I see Matt's got his hand up.
Yeah, what came to mind, and because I guess it's a contrast, is happiness. It sits sort of the center of Aristotle's work on ethics, where he's talking about, people want to be happy, and what does it take to be happy? Well, it takes living an ethical life. And that's a philosophical approach, and the Torah doesn't do philosophy, but yet here it seems to be kind of sort of heading in somewhat that direction.
Okay,
That's good enough.
no,
I'm
you,
done.
yeah, I mean, it's quite well said and very helpful. And I think that that's right, that this happiness, whatever it is the effect of a life well lived, right? Eudaimonia, I think it is in the Greek, that Aristotle says will result from a life well lived. Am I using the right Greek word? There's like 6 of them too. But okay, so, sorry?
I think that's the right word. I think that is.
Okay, so what is the kind of happiness that results from good living, from ethical living, from right living? And Matt is absolutely right to say that this psalm seems to be doing the same thing. This is the experience or the sensation or the inner state that you will achieve if what? Well, let's take a look at if what. If you do not walk in the counsel of the wicked, asher lo halach ba'atzat rashaim, nor stood in the path of sinners, nor sat in a gathering of mockers. So, what is it that keeps you happy? What does it take to do? What are these things that you are not doing? What is it? Hannah.
It reminds me of, I think it was in Proverbs, we talked about there's one path. You have to stay on the straight path, essentially, if you want wisdom. If the goal is wisdom, there's only one path. And if you fall off that path, or if you get led astray, then you don't end up at wisdom. And I didn't love that. And I don't love this for the same reason, which is, it seems to me like in some ways that your happiness could come from having actually done exactly those things, that you walked in the counsel of the wicked and you stood in the path of sinners and you sat in a gathering of mockers, and then you realized that isn't it. It's something else. That maybe you have to know that to then find happiness, that insulating yourself from those things and living this theoretically perfectly righteous life without any missteps. And I think I made this literal, very similar point when we talked about this in Proverbs, but that's where you have to learn. How do you know that happiness is outside of those things if you haven't found the unhappiness of those things? And
okay, Hannah is already arguing with the psalm, which is great. But in doing so, she points out that there's the answer to the question, from whence does happiness come, is that it comes from avoiding wickedness, right? It comes from avoiding wickedness. And Hannah's right to say, and it seems like the metaphor, the primary metaphor that we use to think about going in towards wickedness or going towards or going in the opposite direction is being on the path, right? Happy is the man asher lo halach, who hasn't walked in the way of the wicked. Uveder chataim, and there's a path of sinners, and that person's not standing in that path, right? So then Hannah reads this to mean that happiness comes from never having gone that direction. Although I guess I want to respond with a question: is this psalm saying, Hannah would prefer that this psalm said, you learn your lessons along the way and eventually come to realize what the good and the bad is. And this psalm seems to be saying, no, just don't go in that direction. So those are two different versions of not being on the path. Which do you think that the psalmist is advising? What is it? Is it don't ever go there? If you ever go there, you'll be unhappy? Is it, what do you think? What does it mean to not walk, not stand, and not sit in these places? Shep?
So I was late, so you may have talked about this already, but did you talk about the other meaning of the word ashrei, or
No.
as in, ishur is to give permission, which sometimes that word would then be translated as praiseworthy or permitted. is the one who doesn't walk in the ways, et cetera, et cetera. So that changes the conversation, but
so tell us how it changes it. What is, like, if it's like this person is legitimized, right? This person has been affirmed for their choices. Then what does this mean?
Well, so it's hard. I mean, you know, you sit next to your friend and they're in a moment of chatter. Lashon Hara is a good example. You know, speaking gossip about someone, that's usually viewed as a lazy action, right? So if you're sitting among your friends at shul and they're gossiping and you choose to step away from that, that's a praiseworthy action, because it's hard to, you know, break out of a natural social construct like that.
Great. And Shep is right. This is sometimes translated as praiseworthy is the man who does not. So there's a certain kind of like laudable esteem. Can you hear that, by the way? The sound of the helicopter in my house? Some people know. It's like massively loud. So, okay, all right, I'll pretend you're not hearing. But right, this is not just a state of being, but a kind of an affirmation of this life. Now, Chef gives us one example that kind of takes us into the imagery here of what it's like to sit around people who are speaking ill of others, right? Lashon hara. And that really feels like what's happening at the end of this verse, right? That one of the things that we avoid in this verse is moshav leitzim, a gathering of mockers. So part of what it takes to be happy is not to participate. There are people out there mocking. There are people out there doing wicked things, and there's effort here, right? And that's part of why, good job, praiseworthy, because you had to, I mean, I don't know about you, but it's hard for me not to join in the fun of saying nasty things. So you have to pull yourself away. It's all a negative motion. This is part of what Hannah was getting at. It's all about avoidance. It's all about staying away from. It's not a positive description of happiness. Okay, let's keep going. Jen?
I guess I'm seeing the causation possibly going in a slightly different direction, because the language, at least in English, is vague. And that is it possible that it's not saying you get to be happy by avoiding these things, but if your desire is focused on God, if you're rooted in Torah, then you're happy and you don't want to do these things. The man who is happy doesn't do these things because he's happy, and he's happy because of what the rest of the verses say.
Great. Okay, so it isn't an entirely negative formulation. We'll soon get to what is this guy doing with the rest of his life. So, and the second verse is going to be really, really important here. But before we finish with the first verse, there's more work to be done just in the imagery here, right? Because there is a lot going on. There's the gathering of mockers, there's the path of sinners, and there's the counsel of the wicked. But there's also three actions here, right? There's walking, there's standing, and there's sitting. Right? That's deliberate. Those are three positions, three kind of forms of moving one's body. So what do you think? Like, and this plays very nicely into the imagery that Hannah's already noticed, that we're on this path. So don't walk down the counsel of the wicked. Don't stand in the path of the sinners. Don't sit in a gathering of mockers. What's the positional imagery about? Not to stand, not to sit, not to walk. What's going on there? Florine?
Okay. I think it means don't put your own obstacles in front of you. Don't be the creator of your own obstacles. In other words, flow like the tree that you mentioned later that flows into from the stream and produces fruit and goodness and nourishes. So if you stop and you keep standing or bowing or whatever, you're in a way setting roadblocks in front of yourself from going with that stream of life on an ethical basis or whatever you want to call it. That's a little bit
Okay.
esoteric. Okay.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love the way you're describing it, Florine, because eventually we're going to, right, when we get to the next verse, we'll see that the happy man is stationary, rooted, firmly planted, whereas the things we're worrying about are being kind of on the road, traveling, moving about. And once we're moving about, says Florine, then we have to worry about what we're stumbling over. What are the things that might be obstacles in our path, or that we might trip up on, right? So yeah, there's something about movement that is precarious. Emil.
I was going to say, like, to me, Ashrei or Asher has another slightly different meaning, which is like lucky or fortunate. Like someone who hasn't had to deal with any of this stuff is like blessed, because it's like, you know, he doesn't have to stand up and walk away. His friends aren't jerks. He doesn't have, you know, like, so like when I hear like simcha, I think more of that idea people mentioned of like wholehearted, you know, or sort of like fully engaged. But to me, this just more seems like, well, good job, you know, like someone was smiling on you because you didn't have to deal with this stuff. And I think like David would say to like Hannah's question, like, it's a waste of time to do all, like, you don't need to learn from your own experiences. You can learn from other people's experiences. Like, you already know that it's just like a drag to get caught up in other people's machinations, you know? So, but that's life. So if you can somehow get through life without dealing with any of this, like, that's lucky.
Then you're fortunate, right? And
Fortunate.
it is sometimes translated that way as well. I appreciate that. Fortunate is the man, right? For lucky you if you don't end up in these ways. And it does make me wonder how much of this is choiceful, thoughtful, deliberate action, and how much of this is just like, it's you end up with a good life if you're in the right context, if you're in the right circumstance. All right, let's take a couple more thoughts and then we'll move to the next line. Yonatan?
All right, this may be a little bit strained, but these three motions might be referring to original sin, the eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. That you start with walking in the bad advice, right? The advice of the wicked, being the serpent, and then you've got the derech hata'im, the eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, which that word derech does show up in terms of the penalty that we receive, right? And then finally, the moshav letzim, the council of the chatterers, where Adam and Eve play the blame game, right? And say, oh no, me? And I don't know, maybe there's kind of a reference there to like, here are the steps of sin.
Okay, that's really an interesting midrash you're offering us there, and helpful in the sense that it reminds us that these themes that the psalmist is playing with go all the way back. This idea that like sin is right there in front of you. You have to choose otherwise, and if you don't, you'll be cast out. Right? What is the to be blocked off from derech etz chaim, the way to the tree of life? You'll be blocked off from life. Right? So you have to choose carefully. You have to go down the right path carefully. I want to tell you, by the way, since Yonatan riffed a little bit, I want to tell you that I also have a midrash on these three terms, which is that you start walking and then standing and then sitting. And I can't help but wonder, after our last three classes where we looked at King Solomon in his youth, middle age, and late life, whether the walking is like the young spirit, the standing is like the middle of life, and the sitting is old age. I don't know, but like these three terms so clearly linked do give us that opportunity to think about like, okay, what exactly are those three states? Why do I need to be told? We know that biblical poetry echoes in couplets. Why do I need to be told three times? Right? All right, let's take one more comment and then we're going to go look at the tree. Alexandra.
So this is sort of going off of Emil's comment about being fortunate and somehow avoiding these people gives you good luck. I have this list and it's my favorite thing in the world, so I'm happy to share if anyone wants, but it's how the ancient Babylonians used the Psalms and what they were for. And they used this one to overthrow and ward off those who have fallen or become bad. And there's something about, to me, that I love to think about how to do the, if you think about Torah and then you somehow click into this energy of this higher level energy, and the people who are the wicked somehow fall away from you, I think is a beautiful thing to think about.
Yeah, there are these people out there that are part of the problem, right? That one of the things that the Psalms in general, and this Psalm is dealing with, is those people, the Rishayim, the Chataim, the Leitzim, the people who are like out there doing all this other stuff, and you kind of want to join them, don't you? I mean, you want to walk in there, like there's this, and so it's about a distance, it's about wariness, right? Okay, all right. We're 40 minutes in and we've just read the first line. So it's only a 6-line poem, but we are going to run out of time. But let's take a look at the second line, which some were already pointing towards. What do you do, right? This isn't all about what you don't do. So what do you do? Well, you meditate, ki'im b'torat Adonai cheptzo. Rather, the Torah of the Eternal is his desire. Uvatorato yehegel yomam v'layla, and he meditates on God's teaching day and night. Now, I had a little problem with translation here, and I've bolded it to indicate the word here is Torah. Torah both times. The translation that I got, it says teaching both times. I kind of wanted to translate it as Torah both times, right? Because Torah means teaching, but it's not like, is the psalmist referring back to the Torah of Moses, or just to general God's teaching? So I sort of split the difference, right? It's the Torah and it's God's teaching, but which one do you think it is? Is it just the teaching, or is it the Torah? And whichever one you think it is, what is this guy doing day and night? What does it mean to meditate on the Torah day and night? There's some obvious answers, but I'm curious what you all will is it Torah or teaching? And what is this guy up to? Yeah, Al. No. Okay. Anyone else? All right. All right. So what about meditation? I mean, what about the words that are used to describe what this guy is doing? The Torah, here's a couple of words to consider. The Torah of the Eternal is his desire, chetzo, the thing that he wants. And it doesn't say studies, right? But yeheget, hoget, to like sort of meditate on, philosophize on, think through day and night. So these are all the things that this guy's not doing. What he is doing instead all the time, for goodness sake, is Torah, Torah, Torah. But what is that? What does that mean? Does that mean like study the good book, or what do you think that means? I saw Shep's hand go up.
Look, for me, I think this is saying it's splitting the difference, just as you did. There is this thing called the Torah, and it involves teachings, but more than that, it involves action and immersion. And I think that that's what the yehegeh concept is. You know, it's an early version of mindfulness. Don't just do, think about what you're doing, meditate on it, as it were.
Okay, good. So let's build on what Shep is saying. How does that work? You meditate deeply on Torah, on God's teaching day and night, and that's what you're up to, instead of going down the path of the sinners. I'd love to hear, I see that hands up, and I've heard, and I'm happy to call on people for a second time, but if you haven't spoken before, just you jump right to the front of the line. So just like, and you can put your hand up in the reactions button. I try to see your actual hand, but that's how I end up seeing people the easiest. So I just saw Sally raise her hand. I'm gonna have you unmute there. Sally, there you are. Okay,
technical issue.
Yeah.
I think Shep's point, and forgive me for translating for mansplaining or womansplaining. The meditation, the use of the term meditation implies not a sitting and focusing necessarily. Meditation also can mean infusing your life with, to mindfully walk with Torah, rather than learning or studying implies a sitting, and actually you need to walk with Torah. You need to stand with Torah.
Good, I love that.
You, it's a mindful walk with Torah rather than studying.
Great, I love that, Sally. And
Well, it's really Shem's.
But both of what you are saying is that to meditate on Torah is more than studying it. It's to sort of have it in your consciousness as you move about, right? And as Anna pointed out, there's all this path language. It's all this moving about. So don't go down the path of the wicked. Instead, put, I don't know, Torah consciousness, Torah goggles on, and follow, use that to direct you as you move through the world, right? Reflect on, as you move through the world, how you reflect on God's teaching. How do you incorporate that teaching? How do you move with that teaching through the world? Carol? Let's see.
I think one is the contrast of the other, that the first one is action, the walking, the sitting, the whatever the third one was. And this is exactly the opposite. This is being still. And so you don't do one thing and you do the other. One is action and one is the non-action, which is what makes you happy.
Okay, I love that. I love that. So this is a different read than the one we've been considering just now. Not move this way, don't move this way, but as Carol reads it, you're unhappy if you're like running around and moving and like busying yourself with like the affairs of the world and this. You should be just in meditation, in quiet contemplation. Just sit there and reflect. You can imagine this person just sort of in one of those Japanese paintings, just sort of like sitting, just sort of.
No, but it's a way. It's also a way of avoiding what happened in the first verse.
Do you now, when you say avoiding, Carol, are you saying that as a critique a little bit, like this person?
No. I'm saying if you want to be happy, you don't sit with the mockers, and you don't do that. But what makes you happy is the meditation side, the non-acting side.
Okay, great. So speaking of stillness, in part because it fits so nicely with what Carol just said, but also in part because I want to make sure we get through the very few lines. Let's take a look at the imagery in the next line here, which is a very still, indeed literally rooted imagery. So the Torah is what this, or the teaching is what this person is meditating on. And v'haya ka'et shatul al palgei mayim. He's like a tree planted beside streams of water, planted there, which yields its fruit in season, asher piryo yitem beito, whose leaf never fades, v'alehu lo yibol, v'chol asher yaseh yatzliach, and whatever it does or makes succeeds. So now this is interesting, right? Like, here's this very meditative, rooted, still person. I think a lot of this fits in with Carol's language, but there are things going on, right? This person is yielding fruit, and the production is going well, right? And it never fades, withers, gets old. So why is he a tree? Why is that happy person who's been meditating on Torah? That person's like a tree planted by the streams. Okay, so let's consider that as well. Joe had a hand up from before, so I'm turning back to that comment.
Mine was just originally to add meditation, prayer to meditation. Prayer could have been a part of that. But as far as this next line, I kind of see it being the tree being represented like a tree of life. Literally, this is the person's life. The man's life is productive. It's fruitful. Fruitful could be in the sense of having a family, children, etc. And whatever it produces would be maybe financial or economic success, for example.
Okay, great. That's, I feel like I'm on the Carol train right now, and I want to keep building on this idea that there's an advantage to rootedness, to stillness. And if we incorporate Joe's thoughts, then the advantage is when you stay in one place and you really ground yourself in one Torah, in one tradition, in one spot by the river, then you can build from there. You can create a whole life from there. But if you're always scattered, moving about, chasing things, right, might be a way of reading these first 3 verses, then everything fritters away. Everything fritters away. And I have to say, given that, and also given our time, that is exactly where the psalm goes. So let's read the next line here and then continue to take thoughts. Because now there's a major transition, right? There was the good, this is the happy man, or maybe the good man, the man who's like a tree. Not so the wicked, says verse 4, lo chena reshayim. Now we've seen the wicked before, right? The wicked were the people who were giving advice. Not so the wicked, ki'im kamotz asher tidfenu ruach. The happy man is like a tree planted by the river. The wicked are like chaff, like the husks that you throw away from plants that just blow away in the wind, right? So this fits in the movement that we've been going on. That the happy person is grounded, rooted, and as Joe said, that fortifies. The roots allow that person to stand and to build and to succeed. The wicked, in contrast, right? We were so worried about going down their path. What happens to them? They just blow away. Okay, so what does that mean? Of all the things, like the wicked should be like, I don't know, punished, burned, damned, but they just sort of blow away. How do we make sense of these images? The firmly rooted tree versus the chaff in the wind. Ellen, and then Janet.
A part of it, this may be trivial, but I think it's the reason all of us are here tonight, that there are things that we get out of Torah that nourish us and make us like those trees that are fruitful. And it's certainly we're seeking that by being here tonight. And I think when I think of hanging out with people who are wicked, they're kind of like whatever crosses their mind at the moment. Oh, this sounds fun. Let's go do that. We won't worry about the consequences. Where this person is somebody, I love that word rooted, that you have your roots in some very deep beliefs, and there's a purpose to your life that keeps you grounded and doing things that are more meaningful.
Okay, all very beautifully put, but I will just especially highlight what the beautiful way that Ellen linked the image of the tree by the water to the study of Torah, to the meditation on Torah. And I think that is a very good reading, right? He meditates on God's teaching day and night. He's like a tree planted beside streams of water. That water is, as Ellen reads it, and I think very, very, very profoundly, that's the Torah. That's the thing which nourishes him. Or there's something, the tree is not just rooted, but it's there by the water so that it can absorb what it needs in order to be healthy. Love that. Janet.
I'm thinking just specifically about the chaff blows away. And so much of what the psalmist is saying to us is how to be, and to be aspirational, But I thought that was just the message of just ignore those people. Ignore the wicked. They will blow away. Don't engage with them. And so much of these lines are about the wicked. So the psalmist is really telling us there are many wicked people around us, and we need to rise above it. And just maybe they blow away, maybe they don't engage with them. But I think so much of this is aspirational behavior and techniques to avoid getting involved with these kinds of characters.
Yeah. Yeah, the wicked, they are everywhere, but as Janet says, there's something insubstantial about them. Like there are distractions. You would think that the wicked would be, violent and terrifying and, destructive, but actually it's like they're almost a distraction. They're nothing. They will amount to, don't get distracted by the wicked, because it's just so much noise. It's just dust in the wind. Right? V'titfenu ruach, by the way, the wind blows them away. And of course, ruach is a very loaded word in Hebrew. The spirit blows them away. Right? They get blown away by the spirit. What's the first time spirit is used? Ruach Elokim, the spirit of God. Right? So there's a kind of like, these people will come to nothing. Right? And we are coming to the end of our hour, but that theme continues. Right? So let's just read the last two lines, because again, we see that the wicked just sort of go away. So they blow away like chaff. And I have to say, by the way, I looked up the word for chaff is motz, but it is never used. Every usage I found is like chaff. Like, in other words, every use is poetic. They don't actually talk about chaff in the Bible. They just talk about what it's like to be like chaff, right? So the chaff blows away. Therefore, and this is the harshest line, therefore the wicked will not survive judgment, nor will sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Eternal knows the path of the righteous, but the path of the wicked is forever lost. Let's at least consider, there's lots to say in all of these lines, but what a mysterious last line this is. The Ki Yodea Adonai derech tzadikim. God knows the path of the righteous. By the way, the translation in Safari was God cherishes the path of the righteous. But that's not what it says, but it's hard to make sense of. What does it mean God knows it? God knows everything? Or what does that mean? Whereas the path of the wicked, toved, it becomes lost. It just goes, I don't know what to make of that. Like, what do you make of that? Right? The wicked blow away. They're not going to endure, and then they and then there's that path language again. God knows the path of the righteous, but the path of the wicked just becomes lost. Okay, so let's hear some final reflections on that imagery. Susan came in. No? Yes? No?
Yeah, I was back a little further, but I just wanted to make the point about listening, and the tree reminded me about how important it is to listen and not always feel like you have to talk. So just back to, the standing there, and it would be the same for me of taking in the lessons of Torah, not always having to say stuff about other people.
Yeah, I am wondering, because there is so much about the description of this happy person that is quiet, almost like passive, but like impassive, really.
But listening, remembering that.
But on the other hand, this person produces fruit. What this person does succeed. So like, part of the question that lingers for me here is like, what does the good person actually do? They meditate, but what do they do in the world? And they do have a path, right? Derech tzadikim, the God knows what is their path? Let's see, Deb Jaffe, nice to see you.
Hey, nice to be here. This whole time I've just been thinking about how it's all internal. Like the wickedness is internal. This is just how I thought of it, but the wickedness is internal too. Like the wicked thoughts we all have for ourselves, that will get us nowhere, that will, even the meditative, it didn't strike me as like sitting in meditation. It struck me as how we live our lives in a mindful way that's could be moving, but mindful. And that's when we connect. That's when we are rooted. That's when I do a lot of running around, so I'm hearing all this very, very
Yeah.
clearly.
Yeah, and so much weight to what you said there, Deb. That really there's all this description of the wicked people out there, but we're standing on their path, right? Like we're so easily the wicked people ourselves, right? Like it's about choices, and every one of us has that choice to make. Which path are we going to walk in the world? Which way do we go? We might easily find ourselves suddenly standing in the middle of the path of sinners. So like, how did we get there? You know, why weren't we more rooted in our own, right, internal sense of well-being, of right? David Kurtz.
You know, I was playing with your, when you put in Torah and teaching, and I reversed it, and it made me feel that all of this is the word eternal. All this is about transcendence and about transcending time. What is Torah? Torah is stories. So when you meditate and you transcend these stories, you realize that you're just part of an evolving story. What are trees? Trees last for generations and generations. They bear fruit, but they're, you know, so to me, it feels like, you know, basically, if you live, I mean, to put it quickly, you know, if you live a righteous life and you're on that path, you will bear fruit, and that will be timeless, and that's part of, you are part of Torah. You're part of what God wants. And if you don't, the wicked, you fall off, you disappear. You may have your moment, but you know that's not what is eternal.
This is very helpful. Just as we close the hour, David's kind of this framework of eternality, right, versus the fleeting. That's all over this psalm. Right? Like, what does it mean to be wicked? It means that you're just going to blow away, that you'll be lost forever, that you make jokes now and then it's all like it comes to nothing. And there's something about righteousness that is enduring, eternal. And David's right, because it's attached to God, who is eternal, right? God's name, the meaning of God's name has to do with eternality, with a kind of timeless being. And so the tree is planted and continues season after season. Its leaves never fade, right? It persists, right? And something about the good life is the life of that which endures. I think it's very, very well said. Okay. Any last thoughts? I see Matt is, I love waiting before I call on Matt, because I just love, it's like, I got it. Matt, give us your last thought tonight.
This so contrasts to what we what we had just done, because it's the word that we're not saying is chevel, that this is permanent. It's not a vanity. It's not a breath, and it's a completely different attitude to what we had just been going over. So it's another place. This is the not chevel.
When Matt feels he has something to say, he's never wrong. I'm always kind of chuckling, but then I call him and he says something brilliant. And that is brilliant. That's right. The last book that we considered was the Ecclesiastes, who said it's all just fleeting. It's all just passing, right? And this is saying, no, the things that matter endure. They endure forever. Now, the question is, like, can we reconcile those two visions? Is it that that the thing which Kohelet is saying is vanity is just that chaff of the wicked, is just that, so all of those are those the vanities? Or, as Matt suggests, is this a totally different perspective, which is that no, the world isn't fleeting. You can actually build something that lasts, something enduring, by committing yourself to principles and roots and grounding yourself in that. All right, I'm going to give the last word to Carol.
Thinking about the portion about choose life, and we talk about the tree of life, and that chaff that blows away is dead. It's a dead thing. It may not be insignificant. I think it's very significant. Evil and wickedness is very significant. And it just, I know that parasha very well, Choose Life. I think you read it on Yom Kippur, don't you? I can't remember. I know it was one of my children's bar mitzvah portions. That's how I know it. But this is what came to me, that this is a way that you make a choice in this psalm, and you choose life, not, if you don't choose life, it's death.
That's right.
It's the tree of life, that he gives the image of the tree, which we think of as the tree of life, and it's against the equivalent of death, maybe spiritual death.
You know, I have to say, that brings us back to Yonatan's Midrash, right? Like, it's the path back to the tree of life, right? And Yonatan's right, from the very first, this idea of you have choices. You have choices in this earth. Which way will you go? Which path will you take, right? And the psalm starts by warding us away from the path of the path of sinners, right? The gathering of mockers. But it ends by saying that there is a path for us. It's the path of the righteous. And God, we never got to the bottom of this, but God knows that path. That path is with God. That path somehow is attached to the eternality that God is, whereas there's this other path that we want to avoid. And and on that note, as we close, I have to say that imagery isn't just prominent in this psalm, but maybe because of this psalm, but also because of the Garden of Eden and other places where this imagery appears so prominently in our tradition. The idea of a path, a way, is something that the rabbis took on, right, and used frequently. Like the word for their entire system of behavior was halakha, the way, the walking, the going, how you go down the path, derech eretz, the way to the way of the world, derech eitz chaim, the way to the tree of life. That there was an idea that you have to move through the world in a certain way. And just like, you know, the Robert Frost poem, like two paths diverge in front of you, right? Which one will you choose? It will make all the difference, right? So that's it. We'll end on here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for your thoughts. So good again to have my parents here, and love you all. Good night.